Watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing. Still to come on our program. To mark the second-year anniversary of the Paris Climate Accord, I sit down with the administrator of the UNDP to see how the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, can help the world of the future. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live on Monday to Friday on CGTN. Today marks the 2-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement's adoption. More than 100 heads of states and delegations, but without Trump, of course, from around the world gathered in Paris to reaffirm the world's commitment to fight against climate change. The One Planet Summit, as they say, that celebrates this anniversary is co-hosted by France, the UN, and the World Bank. French President Emmanuel Macron used the occasion to celebrate the accomplishments of the last 2 years by both civil society and governments. As one of the major founding members of Paris Climate Agreement, China also sent its delegation to attend the important summit. But it is not just the climate change accord, but also many of the other sustainable development goals. As the lead development UN Development Agency, UNDP, is uniquely placed to push for SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, or this very important agenda which map out how to end poverty and protect the planet. Earlier, I spoke to Achim Steiner, administrator of the UNDP, to better understand how the SDG, or Sustainable Development Goals, offers a unique opportunity to put the world on a more prosperous and sustainable development path. Mr. Administrator, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back.
It's a pleasure to see you here. UNDP now is working with the other organizations of the UN system to ask countries bring up their specific plan to fulfill their commitment of the Sustainable Development Goals. But some wonder whether those plans are going to be sufficient. How are you going to make sure it's going to happen?
Well, first of all, the United Nations and the United Nations Development Programme are there to support countries. It is the countries themselves who in 2015 took the sovereign decision in New York in the General Assembly Hall to commit themselves to these Sustainable Development Goals. So by the year 2030, every country has agreed to undertake a number of actions, and what our role is today in the United Nations is, first of all, to help countries bring these goals that are global goals into the national context. What do they mean in China? What do they mean in Germany? What do they mean in Botswana? And secondly, to help the country then apply these goals wherever you can make a difference, in business, at subnational level, in a municipality, in a city, lots of possibilities. And I think at the end of the day, these goals will prove themselves very popular.
Well, those goals are popular because so many countries committed to it already. And yet the question is, will people draw only small plans at the very beginning? Will they move fast enough to be able to fulfill their goals? And there will be changes of administration, of governments, elections, political ups and downs in various countries, you name it. So whether that is likely to happen eventually. Achim.
I believe yes, because the reason these goals were adopted is that we looked back on failures in the past. It is no accident that the world came together in 2015 and said inequality matters, because if we don't address it, if we allow our societies to become so polarized in terms of those who have wealth and those who don't, we will have conflicts, we will fall apart. Equally, sustainability, climate change, we are running out of time. We have to act together, first of all as a global community, but we also have to make sure that when we try to reduce emissions, we also talk about access to energy. We talk about mobility, we talk about our cities, and when we talk about our cities and how we drive around, and then we talk about health and pollution. That's the power of the SDGs, and I think governments will increasingly be held accountable, hopefully by their parliaments and by their citizens for what they have signed up to.
But you know, Achim, there are two things that are going on right now while we are speaking. Dramatic change. One of the dramatic change is the geopolitics. You see some countries' politics have been changing dramatically, and that as a result of their power, is having a big impact on the rest of the world. On the other hand, you also see technology develop rapidly, and people cannot make sense of exactly what these technologies would mean to all of us and how they would apply to many of the things you have just mentioned. So SDGs were designed earlier, but things later have changed on these two tracks. What would that mean?
They are very good questions, and you point indeed to two very significant changes that are happening around us. Certainly, there are changes in governments and administrations that happen every day. Now, we happen to be witnessing the changes in the United States that are signaling a significant step back from international commitments and from international engagement. But let me also refer you back to just a few weeks ago in Bonn, when the Conference of the Parties, the Climate Change Conference, met.
Yes.
What you had there was also a significant part of the United States in terms of governors from the states, business leaders, actually saying we will honor the Paris Agreement. So, yes, it is disruptive when governments change and change their policies, but I think the Paris Agreement on climate change is actually very good proof. Never has the world been more united. The last two missing countries have actually now signed up to the Paris Agreement. So in Bonn, you saw a world community united in moving forward, and if one steps back, it is a temporary phenomenon. On technology, I think this is perhaps one of the most extraordinary moments in human history. We are about to enter not only the digital age that has already begun, but with artificial intelligence and automation, changes will happen that on the one hand are extraordinary opportunities. On the other hand, they may also lead to jobless growth. They may lead to automation that, and data ownership and use that disempowers us as citizens, that may use us. This is, I think, where it is very important that we rediscover the fact that technology is not something that dictates to us what happens next. We as societies must set the rules. We make the choices. And that is a part of what UNDP also does. It helps governments look at the opportunities. It looks at lessons learned from regulatory and legislative parameters that are set. At the end of the day, technology must serve us and not imprison us. This is, I think, a lesson we have also learned after the internet bubble.
Talking about the UNDP and the UN system, there has been a lot of questions recently, particularly raised by some countries, about its credibility, its efficiency, its bureaucracy, and its ways of being able to solve problems. What do you make of these comments as head of the UNDP, and is it fair when they are saying this?
It is accurate to pinpoint failures. It is accurate to also criticize and critique bureaucracy. And inevitably, an international public service like ours has these weaknesses. But it is not fair to be dismissive of the vital role that the United Nations Development Programme and indeed the United Nations family is playing every day in our very complex world. You know, we are called the United Nations, but we were founded and we exist because nations are not united. It can be seen in conflicts, in wars, in civil strife. Every day across the planet we are trying to keep the peace with 100,000 peacekeepers. Every night 20 to 25 million people are fed because of the World Food Programme being able to be there when there is a crisis, an earthquake or a conflict, and so the story goes on. So to dismiss the UN's value to our community is unfair, but to critique its weaknesses, I think we have to accept that.
US President Donald Trump is well known for criticizing the UN system and other international mechanisms. If you got a chance, Achim, to meet him and sit down for talk for 2 minutes, what would you tell him?
I would say to him, let me persuade you in 2 minutes why we should take a trip together, namely to the places where we actually work. Criticism from an armchair, from a distance, from a preconceived position is very difficult to reverse. You have to see it with your own eyes. And I think what we have also seen with many presidents who initially take a very skeptical view, when they actually see how important the United Nations is to their national interest, they begin to also look at it differently. And, you know, the Secretary General and President Trump have been interacting very actively and very constructively, including the United States, using the United Nations on a number of occasions in some of the most, you know, dangerous international situations at the moment. So I think, yes, we cannot make those who do not wish to see something, but if we were to be able to walk together and examine where we work, where we make a difference every day, I know opinions would change very quickly.
Well, for now, it's very hard to change people's mentality. That's probably the hardest thing in the world to do. So what to do with it? Will the UN system, including UNDP, become an entity of those willing to participate, not anymore of everyone in the world? And what would that mean, the nature of change, the change of the nature, rather?
Were that to happen, I think a fundamental rationale for having the United Nations would fall away. So no, we do not wish, and I don't think any nation wishes to leave the United Nations right now. Remember, there is an immensely powerful principle in this General Assembly Hall. Whether you're a 10,000 person nation or a 10 million or a billion nation, everyone has a seat at the table. They have a voice, they are represented, they have a right to be heard. And that is the
powerful It is a beautiful feeling, yes.
Absolutely,
indeed.
and it is the Charter of the United Nations, which begins with these very simple but powerful words, we the peoples. This idea is as alive today as it has ever been. The difficulty we have is that nations have always been in disagreement with one another, and the United Nations can only succeed where those who have particular means and influence allow that to happen. So we are a reflection of a divided world, but also the best hope to try and overcome those divisions.
Well, some countries are receding from their role. Other countries seem to be stepping forward in terms of their contribution and working spirit with the UN. China is one of those examples. I understand, Mr. Administrator, China committed to 17 million fund for South-South cooperation over the past 6 months alone. Money, of course, is only one thing, but in a way it reflects China's willingness to work with the UN. How would you describe the stage China is participating right now? And what is likely, from your perspective, you've been in the UN for a long time, you see so many countries, what is likely to be this nature of cooperation between China and the UN for the future?
In looking forward, I think, first of all, there is a long-standing relationship of trust between China and the United Nations and different parts of its family of organizations. So I think the prospect for moving forward together with China's new orientation in terms of being a more proactive player on the global stage, with the Belt and Road Initiative, with its participation in international peacekeeping operations, etc., I think we will see more and more opportunities for the United Nations and China to demonstrate the value, first of all, of having China being a more active participant, but also the value to China. I think the Belt and Road Initiative is going to be an interesting example. It's one of the most significant injections of capital into the development arena since the 1950s. Can we work together to ensure that it is both beneficial to individual bilateral relationships, but it is also contributing to the overall development objectives of poverty eradication?
But then, at the end of the day, you see some countries are committed to the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. Other countries have a wait-and-see attitude. What would that mean for the UN, for the UNDP, when it comes to cooperation on this initiative? After all, you are an organization of almost every country in the world. So how to keep that balance? Interesting question.
I think the principle is very straightforward, as we have done with other donors who have financed work of the United Nations in the past. The principle by which they fund the work of a program such as the United Nations Development Program or the World Health Organization is that a program is adopted by the members. On the basis of that, the chief executive, in the case of UNDP, approach countries and say, are you willing to finance? Are you able to finance our work based on these agreed goals and objectives? And once a country says yes, it is not a matter of controlling it like a consultant or an outlet that you own. You contribute to the greater good, and the rationale very often is that a country may put in, let's say, $10 million, but in return it is leveraging $5 billion of other countries' money to solve an issue. For example, the climate change issue, or many other aspects that require collective action.
Right.
So it's a very good deal from an individual country's point of view.
You used to work for UNDP, now you work for UNDP, so you know this issue very well. For example, the smog in this country, particularly during the winter time. Now, trying to solve it, the people want to close down some of the factories, but then as a result, you have employment issues. You also have possibly the lack of gas as a result of all of this. So there's always a dilemma. It's a very delicate and sometimes very tricky balance that the policymakers have to make. As an observer, I wondered, how do you look at this issue reflecting the bigger juggling that one developing country, emerging economy has to do on a daily basis in a way?
Let me explain it on two ends of a spectrum.
Go ahead.
Echo China's own view of it, I think. One is, at one end of the spectrum, it is a failure. It is a policy failure. It is a failure in decision-making. It is also often, in many countries, a failure to recognize that those who suffer from pollution, for instance, happen to be usually the poorer ones. You know, in the old industrialized cities of the world, wealthy people lived, you know, upwind, because they would not be receiving all the smog from the factories. So one thing is, it's a very unjust and unfair approach, and it is a matter of choice. You can start earlier to clean up manufacturing, then you don't have such a big dilemma. Most countries ended up in this situation of basically the pollution and smog problem becoming so bad that you had to literally damage some of your economy. But here is China doing this in a way much more systematically and much quicker than most other countries. And what China speaks to today is the transition from an industrial civilization to an ecological civilization. So what we see today in China, however, is also the recognition that China has set for itself the objective of moving from an industrial to an ecological civilization. So I believe China has not only articulated a pollution damage control strategy, which has certain economic price right now, it has developed a vision for why it should be doing this and why this is the right vision for development of China in the future.
Achim, last time I saw you, you were still working as the head of the UNDP, but now you've been empowered with this even more important job, because this is UNDP is really like an umbrella within the UN system on the development issue. I wondered how your experiences and expertise in the other field are going to likely to carry you over to this job, and what does it mean to be empowered with much bigger responsibility under the circumstances of dramatic change in the world and also within the UN?
To me personally, at this moment in time when the world has adopted sustainable development goals, the environment is no longer an afterthought. It is recognized as fundamental to the future of our successful development pathways. To then be invited to lead the UN's development program is almost a poetic opportunity, and in that sense I feel very much at home and very excited by the prospect of working also at this particular moment in history in the United Nations, because our world can easily forget how easily it can fall apart, and to be in the middle of an idea that is meant to unite us, I think is also a very special opportunity.
I love the way you said it. It's a poetic opportunity. Thank you so much, Mr. Administrator, for being with us. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Achim Steiner, UNDP Administrator. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world.